Thanks, Bill. Our next series of speakers is sponsored by EQ Building Performance, and I'd like to invite Adam Barker to come up and say a few words.
Thanks, Larry. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Barker with EQ Building Performance. I just want to take a very quick moment to just kind of express our pleasure to be a sponsor for this exceptional gathering and to provide our support for Sustainable Buildings Canada. For those of you who don't know us, EQ is a collaborative consulting firm that brings together architects, developers, and building owners to create high-performance buildings and communities. Our core services include energy modeling and feasibility studies, energy auditing and post-occupancy evaluation, commissioning and M&V services, and sustainability consulting, including LEED and Toronto Green Standard project management. So our team applies integrated design principles and modeling to optimize design, and then later on we look at post-occupancy data to validate it. And we do that as kind of part of the Cricket Energy group of companies, where we work closely with our sister companies to leverage access to a wide range of expertise and data. And this includes, kind of real energy metering data and automation system operation from some of our other groups, particularly in the high-rise residential sector. So our group works on the design, and then a few years later, we're running the buildings too, and we can kind of look at that data and validate whether or not our design's working and what's going on there. We're a youthful company too, so please check out our Instagram at EQ Building. You can follow us there, or you can go to eqbuilding.com if you're not a social media fan. With that, I think I'll bring it back over to Larry.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to change hats here. Excuse me. And as the SBC lead on the Energy Sprong initiative, I'd like to take this next presentation and provide you with some information on this initiative. Before I go ahead and start that, I'd like to acknowledge Anne Legelec, the new Consul General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Canada, and thank her staff for all the work she did to help us out on this. Can we dim the lights down just a little bit here? So Energy Sprong Canada is the name of this particular initiative, another one of the Sustainable Buildings Canada initiatives. And this initiative we got onto in the Netherlands. It's a social housing refurbishment program, but I'll let a character you'll probably recognize tell you a little bit more about it.
And waste a lot of energy, much of which is used in our homes. At the same time, we pay high energy bills in order to live in houses that are actually often uncomfortable because of humidity, mold and drafts. What can we do about this? The Dutch initiative Energy Sprong has come up with an idea. The team at Energy Sprong have developed a method to transform existing houses into net zero energy houses. Net zero energy means that the house generates as much energy as it needs for heating, hot water, lights, and household appliances. This is made possible by the use of new technologies such as prefabricated facades, new smart heating and cooling installations, and insulated rooftops equipped with solar panels. This all sounds great, but who's going to pay for it? In actual fact, the money that you'd normally spend on your energy bills pays for the renovation. So you get a makeover for your house without any additional costs. Hundreds of people in the Netherlands already enjoy more comfortable living conditions following their successful net zero energy makeovers, and new makeovers are taking place every day. Together with government and banks, Energy Sprong creates the right market conditions for innovative companies that want to invest in and develop these net zero energy makeovers. These are all based on prefabrication and industrialization, allowing performance to be driven up and costs down. To learn more, go to energiesprong.eu.
So the Energy Sprong program offers a market transformation strategy to stimulate investment and innovation in whole home retrofits and zero energy housing. It's not a technology program, it's a market transformation program. Essentially, the original founders of the program 5 or 6 years ago aggregated 100,000 units of social housing through various social housing providers to create a market demand for this particular type of refurbishment. Based on that market demand, they went out to the market and asked that the market provide the solutions. We've all seen this particular graph. We have the blue line population growth, and we have our energy targets. What they were able to determine there is that the piecemeal approach to energy retrofitting, incentives for furnaces or for window replacements, are not going to get us there. We really do have to take a whole home approach. So the approach that they took was to do this through what we would call here a P3 contract. So they do not specify the technologies that are required. They specify these 4 conditions. And this is what we, as Sustainable Buildings Canada, would see as a market transformed in the end of this program that we're going to be presenting to you today. So the first requirement within their contract is the home is net zero, and by that we mean designed to eliminate monthly energy bills. So net zero energy fuel cost is the metric. It needs to be non-intrusive. One of the biggest challenges in refurbishment of social housing is the relocation of those people while the work is done. So the work is required to be done within 7 to 10 days. It needs to be affordable. So this is all paid for through savings. And it needs to be comfortable and guaranteed for a period of 30 years. So gone is a specification for an R28 wall and a triple glazed window, and this is the specification that is presented. So after first learning about this particular program in April of 2015, the SBC board approved a research spend to investigate the feasibility of bringing the Energy Sprong program to Canada. Since we first started this initiative, the Energy Sprong International Initiative has now rolled out into the UK, into France. It's moving into Italy and is also in the original Netherlands. So back in September 2016, the board approved the research. A team went over to the Netherlands to have a look at work being done there. We reached out to the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association to determine what was the size of the provincial market, and worked with Natural Resources Canada and CMHC to look at what the national possibility was. We ran a series of design and policy workshops in Toronto and Ottawa. In Toronto, we were focused on the provincial policy, and in Ottawa, we looked at the federal policy, opportunities and barriers. And then we produced and published reports and recommendations, and those reports were put up on our website in September of 2017. You can go in and see these reports at sbcanada.org/EnergySprong. So what were the conclusions from our research work? Is this feasible in Canada? So the first thing that we determined was investing in net zero was critical to this particular work. Energy performance guarantees can be given on a net zero energy refurbishment more easily than on incremental improvements. The home after the retrofit is as good or better than a new home, so the investment can be amortized over a longer period of time. In the Netherlands case, it's 30 years. So number 2 was the right type of housing here in Ontario. The European model of retrofitting low-rise townhouses is actually very well suited to the Canadian context. Ontario has many similar design buildings. in our social housing sector, many of which are expensive to operate, and we all have heard the press about how in need of repair they are. The size and nature of these structures make them ideal from both a technology and constructive approach for the technologies that were developed by industry and then applied to the refurbishments. However, here in Canada, we have climate conditions that are different than in Europe that are required to be considered, and we have basements, which is something that presents a particular challenge to the financial model here in Canada. What we do have, though, is a very large stock of social housing buildings in need of repair and 2 levels of government currently committed to funding that repair. So reaching the initial economies of scale is critical to the success. If I were to go out and try and run this program in the private sector, I would need to talk to 1 million individual homeowners to get 10,000 of them to agree to this program. Once the approach has been successfully demonstrated, though, through social housing, it can then be rolled out to the private sector, and I'll show you examples of that having been achieved. So the right type of housing. Oop, are we going backwards here? Sorry. So what was the size of the Ontario market? As we did our research, we interviewed a bunch of different nonprofit housing providers, all municipal nonprofit housing providers, and we were able to determine, although this shows the top 8 by the time we had completed all of the research and the follow-up that came from the initial presentations and research work, we've been able to determine that with just 10 of our municipal social housing providers, we can aggregate roughly 25,000 units of this archetype of townhouse, which is the typical for this particular program. The biggest takeaway, though, was breaking through business as usual is key to this success of a program like this. Construction innovation, including 3D scanning, BIM, prefabrication, and modular construction, enable whole building retrofits that are faster, they're higher quality, less disruptive than the current approach in Ontario, and have been demonstrated to be successful in Europe. So what are the impacts of the program? So we would see that the impacts would be guaranteed comfort and improved tenant satisfaction for our most vulnerable tenants. We would be able to ensure a state of good repair through these performance guarantees that would be required as part of the performance contracting. It would free up capital dollars for other priority investments like interior retrofitting, kitchens and bathrooms. Community revitalization and a sense of place was one of the significant side benefits that came out of the program in the Netherlands. It drove private sector innovation in construction and technology development that has now moved into the private sector, creating jobs in design, construction, and manufacturing, and providing investors with a dependable return on investment. And finally, key here, in Ontario, it reduces the energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. So once we've completed that particular phase, we have now moved into where we are today, which is in a funding phase. So within the last month, we have provided proposals to the MOECC to fund the market development team, which is to hire the individuals required to do this work. We provided a proposal to the Ministry of Housing that would see the refurbishment of 5,000 units. We are establishing a design competition and pilot funding expression of interest that was submitted to NRCan's Green Infrastructure Phase 2. We await the responses of that. And we've just started and will over the next couple of weeks be looking at the first prototype funding proposal in process through a new program through the Municipal Infrastructure Fund working with the Durham of Region. Where does the money come from? Well, we have several commitments right now, and these commitments could be redirected into a program of this nature. So I would point first to the Climate Change Action Plan that has committed funding to in the order of $380 million to $500 million for social housing retrofitting, and additional $300 million to $400 million for the refurbishment of private sector apartments. We also have a federal government looking at this, talking about an inclusive national housing strategy. And to quote from their budget, as part of a new national housing strategy, the government will invest more than $11.2 billion in a range of initiatives designed to build, renew, and repair Canada's stock of affordable housing, and help to ensure that Canadians have adequate and affordable housing that meets their needs. This includes $225 million to improve housing conditions for Indigenous peoples not living on a reserve. $2 billion of this money is being committed to refurbishment. So the example in the Netherlands was a 50% reduction in construction cost over 5 years from the initial pilot project. So the first project you can see there, Roosendaal, was done in 2010. It took 2 weeks to do, and it cost €130,000 per unit. In Kerkrade, the next year, they were able to get that down to 10 days and reduced it to €100,000. Apeldoorn was done in 2012. In 1 week, they were able to refurbish these units, and I do say these refurbishments are full net zero energy refurbishments, and they did that one at $80,000. When we went over to have a look at the projects, one of the projects we looked at was Arnhem, started in 2014. The cost was €60,000, and they completed the refurbishment in 1 day. So we've put together a proposal to the government that basically looks like this. We would say that we would look at reducing that target refurbishment cost per unit between 2017 to 2030 to a paid-through savings scale. And we would propose that the government initially fund the prototype and pilot stages through to the proof of concept stage. A target price is established based on the net present value of the 30 years of avoided fuel costs and the operation and maintenance costs of those existing buildings between now and 2030. Then, by allowing large-scale tenders of 2,000 units at a time, we would expect that we would be able to reduce those costs down to the range of the target price, which would be in the $40,000 to $50,000 Canadian. That's roughly what we estimate the avoided fuel costs and the avoided O&M costs for today's social housing. So where does that lead? It leads to new housing, same innovation. In the Netherlands, they were able to reduce the construction costs by 50% through a combination of industrialization of the process and through supply chain efficiency. Very large contractors invested in automated manufacturing facilities for panelized wall assemblies in order to do these refurbishments. What they discovered shortly after was the same social housing providers came back to them and said, you know what, we have a big piece of land that abuts that, and we need new housing. Can you provide us zero energy new housing? They took that challenge on and were able to successfully build new social housing at the same cost as code built there. And finally, these large contractors, who were typically commercial contractors in the past, have now set up development arms and are producing factory-assembled, zero-energy housing for sale to the private sector. So the million-dollar question, how do you do it in a day? This is the project we went to see. Could I ask you to start the video, AV? So this is loading up at the factory the day before. This is the next morning. And this is what the tenants came home to at the end of the day. And that's it. So I can tell you from having gone out there and watched them do it, they can do it. What we need right now is a commitment from all levels of government to get behind this type of program in order to move the initiative forward. We have a few minutes if there's some questions that I can answer. Hey, Stephen.
Thanks, Larry. That's awesome. I know how I'm going to surprise my spouse next year.
All right.
It would be a bit of a shock coming home if you didn't actually purchase that house to make over. A lot of the stuff that went on there, one of the things I saw is they basically almost hermetically sealed that building.
That's correct.
And so there's a consequence to that with whatever's left in the walls. Can you speak to some of the risks or how they manage dealing with molds and other things that might be in the existing walls, please?
In each of the buildings, they first go under a building science assessment, and part of that has to do with evaluating the sorry, I forget the modeling for thermal performance of a wall, but they do performance modeling that way in advance of actually assembling those systems. Each of the building or each of the refurbishments includes a mechanical system module that has a heat recovery ventilator on it, and as you can see from that, they have a exterior envelope that go or air barrier that now encompasses the building. They have actually experienced some incidences of contamination within the walls and have worked to remediate that. One of the perks of having these types of wall assemblies is when it didn't work, they just took it off and redid it. But with only a few exceptions, they have had that, but it was something that they considered from the beginning. One of the things that you didn't see in this one as well is there is an air cavity in behind that, and that air cavity they were using to distribute ductwork through it, and we're using that to distribute piping through it as well. So it is not a ventilated space. The entire building envelope is contained within that. So.
It's an impressive looking thing. It looks familiar, especially the big layers of skin that tie the pieces together. Did you blow it or test it?
So first of all, we were there as visitors. So we were kind of in and out over the course of the day. And we did have that discussion, and they did have challenges in the early ones around air tightness, and it was some of the earlier ones that had the contamination problems within that. But you can see that they've gone now to a series of seals and gaskets, and Mark Carver from Enercan calls it a squishy layer that they kind of put in behind it now, which it eliminates the airspace, but it fits it airtight. The original air tightness of those houses was up around 8.5 and 9 air changes per hour. But they don't have mechanical ventilation there, so they have trickle vent systems.
Yep.
So when they did get the latest air testing that we heard about, because we were there a couple of weeks ago, talking to the UK team, but they took us to a site out there, and they were at about 1.8 to 2.2 air changes.
Okay. That's interesting, because with the investment on the membranes and the closures at the back, I would have been looking for something around 1.0.
Yeah, they're working towards that, but air tightness does not seem to be as top of mind around building science in Europe as it is here in our climate, just from my experience in speaking with them. But what you have is you have a contractor who has a performance guarantee. And they have very sophisticated and substantial monitoring that goes on there. So the contractors who have been working with it, that was Volker Wessel that you saw there. Another of the big contractors is BAM Group, and they have been very much focused on that. Currently, they're at about 2,500 units complete, with another 1,000 in the pipeline. So although they were able to aggregate that original 100,000, those are commitments from housing providers. Not every one of the projects can qualify financially to move forward. So these were all sort of aspirational goals at the beginning of the project, but it is still very much a project in process.
Given the tremendous improvement in both time and dollar cost productivity, I would expect if you set a target, they would be able to meet it in fairly short order. So it's be good to follow this one. Thank you.
No, please do follow it, and we are very much so. When we did the research, we brought about 150 different engineers, architects, building scientists, envelope specialists into these workshops, and they've definitely identified a need for a higher level of air tightness, second only by basement insulation as being big requirements. So. Yep.
Yeah, we're finding with a lot of houses in Canada that the domestic hot water heating load, lights, appliances, and plug loads can be as much as a space heating load, especially in a modestly sized townhome. Did they retrofit, swap out the appliances, lighting, or anything like that?
Lighting had been done previously. There was a big kind of movement to do that previously. And I want to point out that you might have kind of caught it in the video. That net zero is not 100% net zero. It's net zero of the building loads. But what they actually do is the tenant gets a energy package, much like a cell phone package. And you have a fixed number of kilowatt hours that you could use in the year. So there's no additional charge to you if you stay within that amount. You are charged if you go above that amount. At the end of the year, in a true-up, if you stay below that, some of the jurisdictions have what we would consider conservation demand management programs that provide a little bit of incentive there. But it is definitely a net zero building energy as opposed to a full net zero, including the plug loads. So I think I have time to take one more question if there is one. All right.
About 20 years ago, my firm got involved in refurbishing condominium townhouses in an area of Mississauga. Became very popular because they had existed since the 70s, and by the 90s, their exterior envelope was simply in need of renewal. And we were being funded by their own reserve funds. And I'm wondering if you want to get this program off the ground with funding, whether you're better to go in the direction of privately owned condos that are now 50 years old, rather than trying to do the 100% funding for social housing.
We had a lot of dialogue about that as we first looked at this. And in the Netherlands, they basically looked at that same proposal. The challenge is, how do you get an industry that's building hospitals and institutional buildings in a very active market to consider small retrofits like this? You really have to aggregate that scale. And to go out and aggregate that through an individual condominium, we need to go to the condominium board and get the condominium board approval. Dealing with a municipal housing provider, especially the Big Ten that we have here, we were able to, within about 6 to 8 weeks, identify 25,000 units that could be refurbished. The construction market today is booming, so we're not even sure if that's going to be sufficient carrot to bring the contractors who have the deep pockets or who have the automated manufacturing facilities already in place to come to the market. The other piece we looked at is our friends here at Toronto Atmospheric Fund are already doing a very good job with the tower renewal program. So we identified this stock as a stock of product that's not currently being served by an existing program. So, but yes, we did look at that because of the funding. But as I say, we're also in this spot right now where we have federal and provincial governments looking at putting money into that particular sector. And one of the pieces that came out strong from the social housing providers was that, with few exceptions, they do not have the manpower or the resources to be able to technically evaluate and tender these particular projects, even to assess the work or to pay consulting firms to do that work for them. So there are exceptions. TCHC, Ottawa, some of the bigger providers, but a lot of the smaller providers are squeaking by day, spending every penny they have on backed up repairs. So there really is a need to aggregate that, and there is funding available in that sector. So I'm going to close off the questions. I'm going to be around for the rest of the day if anyone wants to speak to us. I would also encourage you to go to our website and have a look at that program. And go to energiesprong.eu. One of the requirements of becoming a market development team is that you develop and engage a information sharing platform. There is no IP in this particular exercise, and everybody shares everything. So you can go online, you can see complete documented processes, you can see scan to BIM modeling, you can see CAD files for the refurbishments, you can see all of the good, and you can see the bad as well. So I'll just wrap up with that because we do have some other great speakers.